Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a afternoon session of the reading of Narrowboat by LTC Rolt. And I apologise, we had to reset again. I don't know quite why. I switched on the studio, went to start streaming. It just said, streaming is not available at the moment. Try again. And you press the try again button, and actually nothing happens, as if there isn't a button there at all. So I had to close the browser and start again. But anyway, if you're watching this on the rerun, then you probably won't need to worry about any of that. Good afternoon to Adrian, and hello to Steve G. Hope you are well. It's another sunny day. It's Friday, the end of the week. Does that mean anything these days? That it's the end of the week, or are we all sort of having... There's no sort of about it. Are we all on holiday? An enforced holiday. But maybe there are people, obviously there are people working. I'm still working, or trying to, doing what I do. Today we are reading chapter 30, Norbury, Newport and Cut End. And the interesting thing about this is that I know this part of the Shropshire Union, but more particularly the Newport and Shrewsbury one, and he mentions that, and of course I made a documentary about that, which I have to say at the moment is getting loads of views on YouTube. It's getting loads of views. I made it, golly, some time ago now, something like 2013, 14, I can't remember really. It does seem like a long time, but maybe not as long as it is. On which we will read and discover the guillotine locks, although he doesn't really say very much about the guillotine locks in this. He does have a little picture of the guillotine locks, which are there. That is a guillotine lock. It looks just as you imagine it would do if you were to put your head over the sill. It would probably slice it off. Anyway, hope you are well. We are starting at Cheswardine. I know that Adrian is quite keen to follow us on the maps, and I thought it was yesterday. Yes, I know that feeling. And they start off. Lionel and Angela will start off from there, just giving people a few moments to catch up. Thank you very much for coming along. Mike Stevens, good afternoon. Just missed the start. Don't worry, I had a full start and had to start again. I have a cup of tea in my floating our boat cup this afternoon, which I thought was appropriate, seeing as we're doing narrow boats. And I have pre-read the chapter, which obviously means I'll read it terribly. You should know about locks now, following on Bing's map. Oh, yes. I think they do make a decision on which way they're going to go. Oh, golly, something's just flown into my eye. And having only one eye, that's not good. Linda Kane, hi all. In garden with laptop and Pims. Oh, my goodness, we should be round. Sounds delightful. I know I'm a bit of a tart, really, on the quiet. Bring on the entertainment. I've just got something in my eye, apart from my finger. Never a good start. It was not going to be one of those days today. Also following on the Nicholson map. Oh, the Nicholson maps are the official canal maps, so that's really good. Busy Bee, good afternoon, everybody. Right, let's crack on then. Bring on the entertainment. Sorry, I really do have an issue with my eyeball. With whatever it is. Now, the trouble with my good eye is I can't just fish about with my finger like I can with the other one. Anyway. Owing to unfavourable weather, we remained moored for a day at Cheswardine, but the next morning broke fine, and then we made short work of the 7.5 mile level to Norbury Junction, which we reached soon after noon in ample time to visit the nearby town of Newport for supplies. We passed through an undulating, sparsely populated countryside, densely wooded, cuttings alternating with high embankments, or valleys as the boatmen call them, which afforded us wide views across the plain to westward. Shebden was the only village we passed, but there were several canal side inns, a feature which the Shropshire Union main line seems uncommonly well supplied. Norbury is the junction of the Newport and Old Shrewsbury Canal branch, a waterway that is on our list for future exploration, not only because it passes through the heart of a lovely rural district in the Vale of Shrewsbury, but because it is in many ways unique. It is 25 miles long, falling to Newport by a flight of 18 locks, and then proceeding to Wappenshaw Junction through Berwick Tunnel to Shrewsbury Basin. At Wappenshaw, I filmed there by the way, at Wappenshaw the disused Shropshire tubboat canal commenced. These tubboats measured about 20 feet in length and 6 feet 2 inches beam and carried 5 tons. They were horse-drawn in trains of as many as 20 at a time. The boatman in charge steered them by a rudimentary method of keeping the lead boat in the centre of the channel by means of a long shaft from the towing path. At Trench, 2 miles from Wappenshaw, they were hauled up one of the earliest incline plane lifts in the country. It was 227 yards long, with a vertical rise of 73 feet. The ascending and descending trolleys drawn by wire cables, each carrying 1 tub. Now a grassy slope with no sign or anything, and from when I was there filming, not even an information board, which is a bit of a shame. Good afternoon, lovely Julia, and Graham Roffey, and Ed Loud. Hello to you all. Not even a what do you call those display boards? An interpretation board, which would have been nice at Trench. Nothing, just a slope. It's a shame. Particularly, as he said, it was one of our earliest inclined plane lifts. Linda Kane has got strawberries, cucumber, lemon, and mint in it. It's too easy to drink. Oh my goodness! How decadent. There are people dying up and down the countryside, and this woman is in her garden living the life of Riley. It's an absolute outrage. According to the dimensions given by Bradshaw's guide, the 970-yard tunnel at Berwick must be the most restricted of any in England, being only 7 feet in width and by 6 feet high. It must also have been the scene of even fiercer disputes than those which took place in the early days at Harecastle, for Mr. de Salis adds the following note. There are no fixed hours for boats to pass through the tunnel. There is a white mark in the middle of the tunnel, and should 2 boats meet, the one who has reached the middle of the tunnel first has the right of way. I interviewed the last chap to go through the tunnel. He was the lengthsman who is what was his name? He's in my video. He's got a very high pitched voice. I don't know if he's still going strong. The 2 locks at Eton, beg your pardon, Iton. The 2 locks at Iton, a mile or so west of Wappenshaw, are also unique. Yeah, now there's no water in them at all. They have lower gates of the very rare guillotine type, which open vertically, and the chambers, though only 6 feet 4 inches wide, were made over 80 feet long, to pass 4 tugboats at a time. If these dimensions hold good today, Cressy, with her beam of 7 feet, would not pass through. And furthermore, we heard reports that the canal beyond Newport was in a derelict state. Derelict even then, you see. On the other hand, a travelling maintenance engineer whom we met at Basin End told us that he had taken his boat through Berwick Tunnel earlier in the year. We resolved one day to settle the truth of these conflicting reports. At Norbury, as at Fradley, the village proper was some distance away from the canal, and a second community had grown up, grouped around the wide basin where a roving bridge carried the towpath of the main canal over the mouth of the branch. These included the Junction Inn, several cottages, and the extensive workshops and yards from which the southern headquarters of the canal company were housed. Here were stored all the materials necessary for canal repairs: piles of bricks, clay puddle and gravel, ironwork and spare beams for the lock. Here too were the captains of maintenance boats. Reported for orders. The surrounding country looked prosperous enough, and we expected to find Newport as flourishing a market town as Market Drayton. At first sight, with its wide main street of tall and gracious Queen Anne or Georgian houses, it certainly seemed to confirm this expectation, but on closer acquaintance they revealed an air of slightly faded decadence, like that of an out-at-elbows aristocrat, a melancholy such as pervades the Regency crescents and terraces of Bath. The shop windows looked shoddy and fly-blown, and even the inhabitants seemed to share in the general lassitude. Many healthy country towns may be described as sleepy when their quiet streets drowse in the sun of the afternoon. When their quiet streets drowse in the sun of a summer afternoon, but at Newport this sleep seemed near to death. I know not what the reason for this may be, but I suspect that the younger generation have migrated to the industrial districts of Wolverhampton, Stafford, or the Potteries, leaving Newport to the old and their memories. No matter where you be in this part of Shropshire, the Reekin dominates the landscape, for it is the yeoman of the Shropshire plain, what Beeston is to the Cheshire men. A landmark, a beacon, a barometer. One day, a dim cloud on the horizon as blue and remote as the skies. The next, a stark outline of crystal clarity. At other times, capped with cloud and altogether veiled by mist and rain. This solitary mountain is the farmer's unfailing weather prophet. Like all outliers, it has a trick of changing its shape in the most bewildering fashion as one moves about the plain. To some districts it presents a long and irregular whale back of woods, but crossing the lofty valley beyond Norbury the next morning, we sighted it for the first time as it should be seen, a precipitous, perfectly conical shape, as forbidding as a solitary volcano. It was indistinct, being covered by a drab grey veil which boded rain later, a forecast that was subsequently fulfilled. Spending the greater part of our day in the open, we discovered that we were beginning to acquire something of the countryman's sense of weather, which springs from the almost subconscious observations of subtle changes in the quality of the atmosphere, of cloud formation, of movement, and of the veering winds. Such a gift is only within the reach of those who lead an open-air life, so that it is another heritage of the past that the townsman has lost. Passing through the village of Nosal, pronounced Norzal by the boatman, we entered another of the chasm-like cuttings, which are the dominant feature of this canal. In places the rock sides fell sheer to the water's edge, the streamers of ground ivy a living arras upon them. Here too was the short Cowley tunnel, the only one on the canal. At Wheaton Aston we came to the solitary lock, in an otherwise unbroken level of 25 miles, while around Brewood and Dean's Hall there was extensive parts of fine timber and dense coverts which crowded close to the water. Notices forbade landing and threatened trespassing boatmen with dire penalties for the plump reared pheasants as tame as chickens that strutted unconcernedly on the bank were easy and tempting game. Considering their unparalleled opportunities, it is small wonder that many boat captains are accomplished poachers, and I do not blame them. I know of more than one who habitually carries a gun in his cabin, and nearly all that. Sorry, I'm reading this. I have read this through, so I know what's coming, and I am just reading it appallingly today, and it does get me annoyed. Considering their unrivalled opportunities, it's small wonder that many boat captains are accomplished poachers, and I do not blame them. I know of more than one who habitually carries a gun in his cabin, and nearly all of the boat dogs are accomplished hunters and retrievers. Since most horse boatmen carry long whips, they crack resoundingly as they stand at the tiller if the horse should lag. It is easy enough to cover the report of a small gun as a 410. Fishing with rod and line is usually permissible, provided the boatman remains on his boat, but since few have sufficient leisure time to indulge in this pastime, they resort to less legal methods of the spinner or the nightline. Brewwood is pronounced brood. Oh, is it? Thank you. Brood. All right, okay. Brood. Oh, yeah, brew, as in brewing, and ood, brood. Very good. The only fishermen we met on the Shropshire Union Canal were herons and kingfishers, especially the latter. Every copse and spinney that we passed seemed to harbour at least one of these vivid birds. The brilliant, iridescent blue of their plumage against the russet background of late autumn made a contrast so tropically extravagant that the sight provoked a shock of surprise, such as one would feel were some exotic orchid or hibiscus to appear growing by the margin. Like the herons, the kingfishers sometimes fished the water ahead of us, but adopted different tactics, darting low over the surface in midstream and falling with a splash upon their prey, like a swallow dipping for a floating fly. One morning early, we heard the unfamiliar, high-pitched chattering, more like the squeaking of rats than the sound of a bird, and looking out, saw a pair of them perched upon our bow mooring line. As the afternoon wore on, the country around us began to assume the desolate, blackened look we had come to know so well. Sure enough, the tall chimney stacks on the outskirts of Wolverhampton came into sight as we drew clear of the woods of Chillington Park, and the remaining 3 miles of the Shroppy to Ortherley led us to a veritable no-man's land. The water became black with pollution. There was a desolate swamp upon either hand, and, as if this were not enough, it began to rain heavily from a leaden sky. At Ortherley Stop Lock, or Cut End, as the boatmen call it, the Shropshire Canal terminates in a junction with the Staffordshire and Worcestershire, usually more briefly referred to as the Stour Cut. When I walked into the toll office beside the lock to pay my dues, my spirits were somewhat damped by the When I walked into the toll office beside the lock to pay my dues, my spirits, somewhat damped by the weather, were revived. Oh, sorry. I cannot see. I cannot see. I cannot see the words. When I walked into the toll office beside the lock to pay my dues, my spirits somewhat damped by the weather, they were revived by... I will do this one more time. When I walked into the toll office beside the lock... We're all getting fed up of him going into the sodding toll office. When I walked into the toll office beside the lock to pay my dues, my spirits, somewhat damped by the weather... Oh, I'm reading it wrong. It's the way he's written it. When I walked into the toll office beside the lock to pay my dues, my spirits, somewhat damped by the weather, were revived no little by the toll clerk's greeting. Though I had never set eyes on him in my life, he jumped from his stool with a hearty "How are you?" clapping me on the shoulder and wringing me by the hand as though I was his prodigal son, or had just made a solo crossing of the Atlantic. When we had obtained the necessary passes, we lost no time in mooring up just beyond the mouth of the junction, and were glad to draw curtains and light lamps, shutting out our wet and dreary surroundings. On referring to Bradshaw later that evening, I confirmed the fact that we had made our longest day's run of 15.5 miles. Well, that was only a couple of pages. I've made a right mountain out of a molehill out of that one. I don't... Just can't see the words. Can't see the words. This is chapter 31. Called the Stour Cut. Our shortest route southward to Oxford from Wolverhampton would have been to have joined the Birmingham Canal main line at Aldersley Junction, half a mile south of Ortherley. This would have brought us to the northern terminus of the Grand Union at Digbeth, and so via Warwick to the Oxford Canal at Knapton. Not only would this have involved traversing the entire length of the Black Country, however, but the lockage would have been extremely heavy, there being no less than 84 in all between Aldersley and Knapton. Yet another alternative was to take the Hatherton branch of the Stafford and Worcestershire, and so by way of Wyrley and Essington Canal to join the Coventry Canal at Huddersfield Junction near Lichfield. In this case, again, the lockage over Cannock Chase would be heavy and the region dolorous. So, dolorous, is that? I thought that was a car. So we decided to skirt the fringe of the whole industrial region by turning northwards once more to Great Haywood, and thence to retrace our tracks as far as Fradley. Though the mileage was greater, the lockage was reduced by half, and the way promised to be of greater interest. Though it was blowing half a gale the next morning, we decided to struggle on at all costs rather than spend a day in such dismal surroundings. The wind was coming off the towpath dead on our beam, so Angela walked ahead with the bowline, forgotten what it is now, bow of the boat, the bowline, to keep Cressy from being blown onto the mud until we gained the welcome lee of a cutting so narrow that passing places had been cut into the banks at intervals. Thereafter we travelled better than we had expected, thanks mainly to the shelter afforded by high hedges and to the fact that the canal was much deeper than the muddy waterways of Shropshire. It was a welcome change to be back once more on an old canal with its tantalising twists and turns. A unique feature were the old brick bridges, which were not merely numbered but bore on weather cast-iron plaques such intriguing names as Mop's Farm, Moat House, Long Moles, and Hazelstrine. We were congratulating ourselves on having successfully shaken off the purlieus of Wolverhampton, having passed the junction of the Hatherton branch 5 miles north of Ortherley, when, at an acute turn, a violent gust caught us fairly broadside to sweep us uncontrollably onto the bank, where we landed, not upon mud, but on a rocky bottom with a most alarming series of bumps. It took us an hour of bitter struggling with both bow and stern lines ashore to haul Cressy into the shelter of a bridge hole 100 yards ahead. We then tried again, but at Calf Heath Bridge, half a mile beyond, despite all our efforts, the wind, now risen to a gale force, beat us again. It drove us onto the towpath side, where we should have fouled the navigation, and so great was its force on our cabin side that it was all we could do to shaft across and more securely on the opposite bank. This we eventually managed, using double lines fore and aft, those aft around the trunk of a convenient thorn bush, the forward ones to both our mooring spikes. Even so, these were nearly torn out of the ground during the night. It had been an unusually hard day, but this only made it more enjoyable to settle down for a comfortable evening by the fireside while the wind boomed impotently outside. The gale spent itself before dawn, and we awoke to see sunlight patterning our cabin roof with light. The previous day having been a Sunday, we had met no traffic, but now we heard the sound of hooves and the creak of tackle on the towpath. We looked out to see the first day boats we had so far encountered. These craft, sometimes called open boats, are used for the short distance traffic, the boatmen who work them plying continuously to and fro, spending no time at all at the wharves in loading or unloading, but picking up a different boat. They carry no sleeping accommodation, being either quite open or having a diminutive cabin to provide shelter for meals in inclement weather. These particular examples were working between Wolverhampton area and the Cannock Colliery wharfs at Rodbaston near Gailey. Although most of them were extremely dirty and carried little or no paintwork, their construction was interesting, for unlike the long-distance narrow boats, they were built with completely square bilges, a tall towing mast, and a very primitive type of cut-water bow. They resembled minutely the boats appearing in Percival Skelton's illustrations of the early editions of Smiles' Lives of the Engineers, and therefore may well have been survivals of the canal boat in its original form. In view of the perfect morning, we lost no time getting under way, and we were soon taking our turn to lock down through the busy locks at Gailey. 100 yards or so beyond the tail of Rodbaston Lock, we passed the coal wharf, where the day boats were loading, and entered upon one of the most interesting stages of the whole journey. One day boat still makes a weekly journey with coal to the Stafford Salt Works, but otherwise this northern section of the canal to its terminus at Great Haywood is virtually disused, except on rare occasions when through traffic is diverted owing to a stoppage on the Shropshire Union route. The towing path, up till now a wide, murky track, suddenly became a field path, narrow and overgrown, while the canal itself underwent a similar transformation, resembling the reedy channel of the Leicester Canal. The sides of the locks were matted with weeds and coarse grasses, the paddle gears on their gates dry and rusty from little use. Willows, long unpoled, stretched their branches so far and low over the water that Angela's bicycle was swept from the deck to hang precariously by one pedal from the cant rail. It was just after we had retrieved this misfortune that we sighted the Cross Keys, a little lost canal inn standing amid the fields beside the towpath. Its windows seemed to be gazing over the water with pathetic expectancy for boats which never came, so that we had not the heart to pass it by. Sitting on the bench in the sun before the door, we talked with the landlord while we drank a glass of his mild. Trade had been brisk, he recalled wistfully, until the traffic had passed to the Shropshire Canal, and he remembered the time when never a night passed by but several boatmen would moor by the door and lead their horses to his stable. "A jolly lot they were," he said, "and rare times we had when they got in here of an evening, a singing and a playing." Now he had to make the best of new manners and changing fortunes by letting out his field to campers from the Black Country during the summer months, and in the winter, he confessed with a shake of his head, he kept very quiet. Half a mile from the Cross Keys, through Phillance Lock, came to the village of Penkridge, where we paused again, this time to lay in stores at the village shop. What we saw of the place from the canal was pleasant enough, but the road traveller sees a very different picture, for it has the misfortune to lie on the main road from Wolverhampton to the Potteries and Manchester. The narrow main street was no match for the great leylands and scammels which shook the old houses to their foundations. So progress has blasted a bleak three-track motor road. The narrow main street was no match for the great leylands and scammels which shook the old houses to their foundation. So progress has blasted a bleak three-track motor road through the heart of Penkridge, and yet another English village has been laid waste to save minutes. When we were ready to cast off again, the sun had gone in, and we travelled on through one of those grey and windless afternoons peculiar to the Indian summer of late autumn, when the richly scented air is still mild and so calm that the eye can detect no movement of faded leaf or reed blade, while even the birds are still and silent. On such a day, all nature, save only restless man, seems to pause from the endless labour of the seasons, as though to gather the strength to face the winter. Though it would have been a lovely journey at any season, the country through which we passed appeared to be at its best advantage in this calm, sunless weather. Our course lay between the marshes of the little river Penk and the dark woods of Teddesley Park, which swept down from the slopes of Cannock on our right. Nowhere, either upon the long levels of the marsh or in the dense coverts which pressed close to the water's edge, was there a sign or movement of any living thing, so that Cressy's slowly gliding over the mirror-like surface of the water seemed an intruder in some forbidden sanctuary, and the road she had travelled some forgotten river backwater instead of a man-made canal. We returned to the workaday world when we cleared the sheltering trees of the park. For at the hamlet of Acton Trussell, a woman in a bright painted apron was feeding her chickens, and a cowman was calling his herd into the evening milking with a "Come up!" and a melodious "Hi-ho!" This day's journey came to an end when we moored by the bridge called Roseford under Acton Hill, the sky clearing towards sunset and the night starlit. The next day provided a contrast, for never before had we seen so many birds as hunted the marshlands between Deptmore Lock and Haywood. Not only were there our old friends the kingfisher, heron, swan, coot and moorhen, but snipe, darting away in the swift flickering light, and wild duck breaking suddenly from the reeds by the margin with a startled whir of their wings. We had not gone far before we were joined by an escort of swans, which swam steadily before us for over 2 miles. If I speeded up Cressy, they immediately responded by paddling more furiously, clinging desperately to their precious dignity. But at last they tired of the relentless pursuit, and taking to the air with turbulent commotion, circled over our heads, their great wings making a rhythmic drumming sound. Having followed the Penk to its confluence with the Stour near Stafford, the canal, which had up to now been heading almost due north, swung abruptly south-eastwards to follow the Sow Valley, thus circling the high ground which marched continuously on the right bank. At this turning point was the blocked-up mouth of the old Stafford branch, and also the Stafford Salt Works, where we saw the solitary day-boat unloading its weekly cargo, and knew that we were entering deserted waters. Even on the canals where it is a common occurrence to travel all day without meeting another boat, there is an added sense of satisfaction to be derived from navigating a disused waterway. If any proof were needed that we were the first boat to cover the 4 miles from Baswich to Haywood for many months, it was the dense patch of weed that we struck near Lodgefield Bridge. Fortunately, it didn't extend very far, for it was a veritable sargasso, so dense and deep that although we entered it at good pace, Cressy rapidly lost way and only just reached clear water without assistance. At Milford, beneath the shadow of the Milford Hills, we crossed the river by an old stone-built aqueduct of the familiar Brindley construction and approached the last lock on the canal, Old Hill, or Tixall. The lockkeeper was busy on the towpath trimming the hedge, but as we hove into sight round the bend, he dropped his bill and ran back to the lock as fast as his elderly legs would carry him. No wonder the passage of a boat through Tixall Lock was something of a major event, for we were the first, he said, for 6 months. He insisted upon working the lock for us, which was probably all to the good, since the lower gates were so decrepit that they looked in imminent danger of collapse, and leaked so badly that the lock chamber had half emptied before he had time to draw his paddles. He assured us, not without pride, that one gate at least was over 30 years old, and we saw no reason to doubt it. If we'd been struck by the beauty of Great Haywood when we came into it by the Trent and Mersey, the approach from this direction surpassed it. Coming round the bend below the tail of the lock, the canal broadened unexpectedly, so that we found ourselves sailing out into a long lake fringed by tall flags and dotted with hundreds of coot and moorhen. Though the water was very deep, it was of such remarkable crystal clarity that looking down from the deck I could see every pebble on the bottom and the full shape of our hull. In this way we came to the junction by the familiar graceful bridge, drifting slowly across this still expanse of water, which might well have been that magic mere, whence Bedivere flung Excalibur, the lazy ripples from our screw dying long before they reached its borders. On the crest of a park-like slope overlooking this lake, we had noticed a curious building, which we took to be Tixall Hall. So as there were some hours of daylight left, when we had moored up by the junction, we set out on foot to explore. What we had seen turned out to be merely the enormous gatehouse, a most fearsome example of Strawberry Hill Gothic, its 3-storied facade gaped with great stone mullions, while over the archway plump, nude figures reclined in voluptuous abandonment. Behind this monstrosity lay a vast barrack of stabling in the shape of a rotunda. But of the house itself, not a stone remained. Assuming the gatehouse to have been but an insignificant foretaste of things to come, I shudder to contemplate what the hall must have looked like, for as an example of the grotesque caricatures which resulted from self-conscious architects' attempts to recreate the purity of the medieval Gothic, the gatehouse of Tixall could scarcely be surpassed. Its floors are missing, and the great open fireplaces, one above the other, yawn into space. But we climbed a spiral stairwell in one of the turrets, and standing over the canal to the wooded heights of the Satnal Hills, where, sure enough, stood the inevitable whimsy without which no 18th century vista was complete. It also was evident that the canal had been bidden to conceal its commercial operation and masquerade as a lake to placate the vanished lord of Tixall. Descending, we walked back to the boat, through the gathering dust. Along the waterside, the coot were clucking and calling to one another, setting the tall rushes waving as they scurried to their shelter. And that was chapter 30, whatever it was, 31, I think. And I apologise for my inept reading. Really struggled with my eye. There's something got in my eye and it was just sort of swimming about. Stayed at Acton Trussell. Oh, did you? Penkridge Market Town, just down the road from here, says Les. Oh, right. Oh, okay, that sounds good. Just coming into my area, says Ron. We're coming into Lichfield and the Coventry Canal next. I think he's referring to Sargasso Sea here, says Mike. The Stratford branch is to be rebuilt. Oh, is it? The canal as at present does not go through central Stafford. This book has me watching narrowboat videos recently. There you go. I'm sure Mr. Rolt would be happy to know his words have inspired others. Yes, no, most definitely. Oh, and the gatehouse has been restored. Wow. How about that? Lives of the Engineer sound like another book. Oh, does it? Yes. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, if that's okay, because there's still something in my eye that's irritating it. I just was really getting frustrated. Well, you saw how frustrated I was getting. I couldn't see the words at all. There's something in there. And when you've only got one eye, it's a real hindrance. It's very easy. Yes, telling me, don't worry, Richard, your reading is thoroughly enjoyable. Yes, it wasn't enjoyable for me, though. That's the thing. You're trying to make it enjoyable. It's like the swan, you know. Underneath, I'm doing this. My eye's going, what's the next word? What the hell does that say? Where is it? Well, oh, gosh, I can't read this. That sentence doesn't make sense. And you're trying to read it nice and relaxed and smoothly, and I could feel myself just getting more and more tense, clenching my fists, getting myself all worked up. Dear, oh dear. Anyway, some days it's a joy, and other days, for some reason, it just seems incredibly tough. However, that's I think practice makes perfect, and it is true. You've got to just keep going, and even if it was crap, you've just got to keep going. Hopefully, the main meaning came over. Anyway, I will go and sit in the sun now and relax for a minute. Yes, no, I didn't. I certainly didn't enjoy that. Well, when you're fighting your eye and you're trying to, Anyway, let's not go on about it. People will think I'm a wimp. I do. Overall, I enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy it. It's just today was not the easiest of days, and I'm going to go and sort this bloody eye out, wash it with something. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I will catch up with you again. Look after yourselves. I'll be back at 8 o'clock. I'm hoping the lovely Julia will be on the show live for the Vogue show. So we'll see how we go. Anyway, it's Friday, so, nobody wants to work on a Friday, do they? I will catch up with you later. Take care, and thanks for coming along and putting up with me. Bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.